This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across Africa and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets for you. So this disconnect between at least American equities and what's happening in the real economy just keeps growing and growing. Barely 2 years after becoming the first company in the world, at least as far as publicly listed firms are concerned, to have a $1 trillion valuation, Apple has set another record. It's hit a $2 trillion valuation earlier today. Shares in the tech firm has risen by nearly 60% so far this year. $467 was the last price on the board. Kenya's NSE 20, the index was rejigged a little bit on the 14th of August. It was just off a fresh multi-year low hit yesterday at 1729.46 points. It's well past the lows that we hit even in 2009. Here's what's coming up tonight. Saudi Arabia piles pressure on OPEC members who are not adhering to agreed-to production quotas. Construction of a $3 billion hydroelectric power dam in a UNESCO heritage site starts in Tanzania. And we'll explore why TikTok employees in the United States are set to sue the country's president. All right, then let's start the hour in the commodity sector. Saudi Arabia has kept up pressure on OPEC plus nations that have been exceeding their oil output targets just hours before meeting to review compliance with an agreement to cut oil output by about 7.7 million barrels of crude per day. King Salman bin Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia called Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari to emphasize the importance of complying with production quotas and compensating for past shortcomings as well. Nigeria and Iraq are among OPEC members who have consistently fallen short of pledges that they agreed to cut production. OPEC and its allies between them have been scrambling to respond to the unprecedented fall in oil demand triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. OPEC Plus moved from production cuts of 9.7 million barrels a day to about 7.7 million earlier this month. So far, though, that marginal supply boost hasn't derailed the fragile recovery that we're seeing in oil prices. Brent futures are trading at $45.37 a barrel at 17:13 GMT, roughly 0.2% lower at that point in time. So let's get the latest from the markets. Natalie Powell joins us now live from London with more. Natalie, let's start with what's happening across the Atlantic. Over 500 oil rigs have gone offline in the United States, the bulk of those from mid-March. At these prices, are there any parts of the US shale industry that are still breaking even, or should we expect more job losses and more bankruptcies to come?
Well, the major concern here, of course, is going to be the potential of a second wave coming. We've seen COVID-19 cases increase in a number of countries around the world, and there are big concerns that a second wave could then potentially bring out more lockdowns, more economic slowdowns, or even potentially shutdowns. And that, of course, is going to have a big impact on global demand for oil. The other thing we've got to remember as well is the airline industry is still struggling, and we've seen jet fuel recovery very, very weak. So all of this paints a very, very uncertain picture indeed. So far in the US, we've seen over 20 US companies already file for bankruptcy protection. KPMG is predicting that as many as 250 could go bust by the end of next year if there is not a recovery in the oil sector. And we've also got some signals from Deloitte as well, suggesting that production and exploration companies could essentially write down the value of their assets to the tune of about $300 billion. So a big uncertain picture that's presenting itself, and we are likely therefore to see more bankruptcies and more job losses as time ticks on.
Indeed. So earlier this month, OPEC made a slight revision to the demand forecast for 2020, trimmed it just a little bit, taking 100,000 barrels a day of output off the table. But what are the downside risks to the demand forecast that's being made by this production cartel?
Well, Saudi Arabia is pressing places like Iraq not to essentially open the floodgates when it comes to oil production. And that's because the downside risk is that the expectations, the analysts may well be below the expectations there and fall below those predictions. Now, in the US, we've seen the driving season essentially come and go, and demand is still weak there. I've mentioned the second wave, that's a big concern as well, and how that could impact oil demand. But also the likes of unemployment rates increasing is going to have an impact as well, and potentially have an impact on that demand and weaken that demand for oil. Therefore, all of this is going to put a lot of pressure on those oil prices.
Indeed. One last question for you. As you mentioned, the Saudi monarch and the Nigerian president, they spoke earlier today about the latter's non-compliance with production quotas. But let's step back a little bit here. There isn't much that OPEC can actually do to punish non-compliant members who have problems of their own back home, is there?
That's right. The big issue here is that OPEC really doesn't have a mechanism to punish those who are non-compliant. And of course, it doesn't really have a track record in trying to ensure that these quotas are met and that the limitations are put on production either. What it does have, though, is a lot of members, and those members can therefore put pressure on the members who aren't complying. And we've seen that through conversations between Saudi Arabia and Nigeria that have taken place recently, of course. Now, there is a silver lining to all of this, and that is that at the moment compliance is around about 95%. And of course that's not 100%, but that's pretty good when you compare it to, say, 2018 levels, where compliance was around about 87%. Now, the likes of Saudi Arabia are underproducing at the moment, but we're seeing places like Nigeria, like Iraq who are overproducing. So clearly there is some way to go. Those places that are overproducing, however, have reduced production from a few months ago, so it is going in the right direction. But clearly some more work needs to be done and some more pressure perhaps put on those nations that are overproducing.
Indeed, it is a free rider problem, isn't it? And Natalie Powell there in London, thank you. Now let's move on to South Africa. The country has officially moved into level 2 of its nationwide lockdown. More restrictions on the economy have been lifted, but not all businesses which are closed under prior restrictions will be able to reopen. Many companies and businesses suffered under the country's deeply restrictive lockdown once it came into effect back in March. Most were compelled to either lay off staff or wind up. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu found this report.
The government acted quickly to curb the spread of COVID-19, but the pain of almost all economic activity being shut down will be felt for a long time to come. Many of those businesses that are still operational were assisted by a massive contribution from the private sector. South Africa's big banks have made over $2.7 billion available to those in need.
This relief is not exactly a grant, it's more of a deferment in most cases. People are basically allowed to defer payments for a few months until cash flows come back online. It would make sense because banks are supposed to be guarantees of deposits of their clients.
Loans with special conditions are available to ensure businesses remain operational and, more importantly, to keep staff employed.
One of these revisions is clients being able to access the loan over a longer period. Some of the changes include that the bank credit assessment and loan approvals will be more discretionary and less restrictive, in line with the objectives of the scheme. And this is the recent revisions to the loan guarantee scheme. Larger businesses can now apply as well, and that's more helpful because larger businesses tend to employ more people. So again, helpful from an economic activity point of view, but also from an employment point of view.
The loans can be used for operational expenses such as salaries, rates and taxes, to honour lease agreements and even for contracts with suppliers. The banks received close to 50,000 applications. Over 84% of individuals and over 95% of business applicants have since received support funding.
What's most helpful is keeping this loan going now that the economy is restarting and reopening. So allowing businesses to have this facility to build their operations over the next 6 months, because businesses now more than ever need to have the confidence that they can actually expand and grow. Otherwise, how will we see economic recovery?
We've released about 3 million incomes lost in the period of the lockdown. Look at or compare to the amount that government's made available for instance, loan guarantees. Initially, they said 100 billion, and it pushed it up to as much as 200 billion. It could be possible that many people are unaware of the processes or are fearful of being denied, despite the fact that the vast majority of people that do apply appear to be getting relief.
It will take time before the South African economy can get stronger. Ongoing assistance from the private sector will be key, but government needs to tackle corruption urgently before there's any real improvement. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
South Sudan Central Bank has lowered its policy rate by about 300 basis points to 10% as it tries to mitigate the economic damage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic on Africa's youngest country. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has the details from Juba.
South Sudan Central Bank says lowering the interest rates should encourage spending on credit and investment and help stimulate the country's sagging economy.
The downward revisions of the central bank rate to 10% is meant to reduce the overall cost of financing extended to private sector by commercial banks. Affordable loans will benefit business and South Sudanese citizens alike at this time of crisis.
But one challenge for the Juba-based Bank of South Sudan is that many businesses and individuals in the country rely on cash and don't hold bank accounts. Experts say that limits the impact the central bank can have.
In order to make right policies, it is good to have an overview and control over the quantity and the flow of the money in the country.
The Apex Bank in South Sudan says it is also lowering the cash reserve from 15 to 10% to reduce economic hardships on individuals and businesses during this period of the pandemic. Economic experts say lowering the cash reserve ratio means commercial banks can lend more money to businesses and households since the mandatory amount required to be kept in reserve is lower. However, some economists argue that for South Sudan's economy to fully function well, more work still needs to be done.
The struggles of the economy in South Sudan is largely due to several factors that of course includes the inability of the central bank to carry out a robust macroeconomic policy and monetary policies that can regulate the financial sector, and also the fact that the public financial management process in the government is hugely influenced by indiscipline, I would say, in spending by different spending agencies.
The Bank of South Sudan says it has a number of measures in place to help the economy navigate the adverse effects caused by the pandemic.
The central bank says the coronavirus pandemic is a wake-up call for South Sudan's financial sector. It says reducing interest rates is one way it can try and encourage greater investment into the economy at this challenging time. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Right, then a quick run through some company headlines for you. Let's start in the world of telecommunications. MTN Group has picked the group's current CFO, Ralph Mupita, as the new group president and CEO. He'll be taking over from Rob Shuter, who's going to be stepping down formally on the 1st of September, even though his contract ends next year. Mupita ascends to the helm, having served as MTN Group CFO since April 2017. He's a graduate of the University of Cape Town with a degree in engineering and an MBA. The former CEO of the Kenyan retailer, former Kenyan retailer as well, Nakumatt Supermarket, Atul Shah, has failed to stop the Bank of Africa from auctioning his personal property worth at least $18 million. So the loans are offered to the collapsed retail chain. The bank is the first to seize Mr. Shah's assets, or assets of people related to him, after creditors vowed to attach assets owned by him and his family to recover billions of shillings lent to the fallen retailer. Bank of Africa is seeking to recover some $6.5 million advanced to the collapsed retail chain. In South Africa, the retailer Truworths has flagged a decline in full-year earnings of as much as 33%, and it's citing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The owner of the YDE clothing stores said for the year through to June 28th, headline earnings per share, which is the main profit gauge used in South Africa, stripping out some one-off items, is likely to decline by between 28 to 33% from the 580 cents reported a year earlier. And finally, the Oracle Corporation has expressed an interest in buying TikTok's operations. It's already held preliminary talks with its Chinese owner, ByteDance. The company is considering buying the app's operations in a couple of markets, the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Oracle was working with some US investors that already have a stake in ByteDance, including General Atlantic and Sequoia Capital. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. The construction of a $3 billion hydroelectric power dam starts at a UNESCO heritage site in Tanzania. And small enterprises in Egypt may get access to a $200 million credit line from the European Development Bank. The details coming up next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. You're 15 minutes into Global Business Africa. Now, construction has started on Tanzania's controversial $3 billion Rufiji hydropower plant. Once complete, that facility will have an installed generation capacity of just over 2 gigawatts. The thing is, this dam is being built in a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's home to many threatened species. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with the details.
East Africa's biggest energy project is looking to make a bang. The 2,115 megawatt Julius Nyerere hydropower station will be the 4th biggest dam in Africa and 9th in the world. It was a vision that was first pushed forward by Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's founding father. Construction has begun and the plan should be finished within 2 years, paid by the government.
Up to now, the government has fully paid $560 million. The money's there. Whenever the contracts need to be paid, the government pays. And this is money collected from Tanzanians.
The government says this is the biggest energy project the country has ever undertaken. Upon completion, it's expected to double electricity generation. With this project, Tanzania should join only a few other African countries that have electricity in both rural and urban areas. And the government says that this increased power supply is not just about domestic use, but could push economic growth too. The power project is being constructed by a joint venture of Egyptian companies, Arab contractors, and El Swedi Electric Co. It has employed hundreds, and 80% of the staff are local.
Up to now, there are 3,897 employees at the site. They're working hard. Our goal is to get to 6,000 workers.
Environmentalists at UNESCO have raised concerns about the insufficient strategic environmental assessments of the hydropower project, but the government maintains the impacts will be minimal. Historically, 45% of the power sector of Tanzania has been generated through hydropower, but this plant was first dreamed of more than 50 years ago. And now, and just after half a century later, it may, at last, be about to bring power to millions of people's homes. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has lent $200 million to Egypt. That facility will be channeled through Banque Misra, and it's designed to provide short-term funding to SMEs and private enterprises that have been hit particularly hard in this COVID-19 pandemic. From Cairo with the details, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
A $200 million fund delivered to Banque Misra in Egypt this week from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is a welcome relief to the nation's business sector. Most of the money will be distributed to the small and medium-sized enterprises that are reeling from the ripple effects of the coronavirus pandemic.
This has come at the right time, as the trend around the world is to support the private businesses to protect it from bankruptcy. In this case, the EBRD money will support SMEs that don't have liquidity and are nearly closing down. It will help keep them afloat.
This is not the first EBRD aid since the pandemic broke out. $500 million have been delivered to the state-owned National Bank of Egypt in June, also for SMEs. The financing is coming at a time when Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has assented to a new law that will provide funding incentives and facilities to the small and medium-sized companies. The central bank has pledged about $12 billion to implement this plan. Around 120,000 companies will benefit from this move.
It's an important law. Among other things, it provides tax incentives and discounts. It allows the state to refund a percentage of the price of the land purchased by the SME and the cost of establishing a plant or workshop. It will also provide soft loans without much conditions. This will serve considerable liquidity to the business at a critical time.
Experts say SMEs have a special status because they create the highest number of employment opportunities in the market. They are one of the largest contributors to the tax system and the main pillar in the economic growth and development of any country. Yasser Hakim, CGTN, Cairo.
On to West Africa now. Nigeria is gearing up to resume international flights. The West African oil and gas producer shut down her airspace to domestic and even international traffic back in March in order to curb the spread of COVID-19. International flights to Lagos, the commercial hub, and Abuja, the federal capital, will now resume from the 29th of August. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with that report.
The announcement comes just over a month after Nigeria opened its skies for domestic flights. And just like they did back then, aviation authorities are adopting a gradual approach in reopening the country's international airports for commercial flight operations with new rules for passengers.
So what would happen is that very close to your departure date, as much as close to your departure date, you will take a test, COVID test, where you're coming from, very close to your departure date. And then, of course, you would online fill in the health questionnaire we will have, so that you don't bother yourself filling long forms while you arrive or in the aircraft. And then there will also be a portal that will be open. Prior to your departure, you will pay through that platform. You pay through that platform for a test to be done here in Nigeria day 8 after your arrival.
Arriving passengers will not be required to quarantine, but self-isolate before the second test is taken.
The protocols, procedures, and processes will be announced in due course. However, what we have become used to, physical distancing, wearing of masks, washing of hands, temperature taking, etc., will continue. In the beginning, there will be 4 flights into Lagos and 4 flights into Abuja daily.
Some people have questioned the logic of allowing international flights when the virus is still active in most parts of the world and the country itself is yet to flatten the curve. But this is how the man coordinating the country's fight against the disease responded.
At this moment in time, we need to be pragmatic, and we need to know what we can do to make sure that the airports open safely, and we need to balance lives with livelihoods, and the airports need to start functioning. The longer they stay closed, the more difficult it will be for us to normalize.
The news will come as a bit of a relief for players in the Nigerian aviation industry, who've been hit very hard by the closure of the airports and suspension of flight operations.
The entire value chain of aviation has been tremendously affected. Right now, almost all the value chain are broke, bleeding. Workers are home, businesses are down. And so if you feel the pressure of people, if you feel their blood pressure, people would rather say, well, I better die of COVID than die of hunger. So I think the entire nation will be very happy to hear the announcement that once international air is open, domestic air is open, business activity will start all over, and the entire value chain will bounce back to business.
Before now, the two airports had been receiving evacuation flights, and so a lot of safety measures had been put in place in compliance with the country's COVID-19 guidelines. What the airport authorities are now expected to do is scale up those measures and get the terminals ready to receive a relatively high volume of passengers beginning from the 29th. All things, of course, being equal. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
On to East Africa now. A survey conducted by a Nairobi-based market analysis firm, Tifa Research, shows that nearly a third of low-income residents of the Kenyan capital have lost their jobs since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. The International Organization for Migration is worried that this, in turn, could lead to a surge in human trafficking as many more people are now desperate and vulnerable. Let's take a look at a story of a Kenyan woman who traveled from Kenya to New Delhi last year to seek work. But she says she was forced into prostitution to pay her traffickers before the IOM rescued her.
Jay, not her real name, was promised a job as a housekeeper by her cousin. Instead, she ended up working in a brothel in India.
When I heard there were job vacancies in India, I was so happy. My family knew I was sick. In 2017, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I knew no one in my family could afford to take care of my treatment. We have no father, so I saw this as a great opportunity to go and pay off the medical debt, get treated, and come back home without anyone knowing I was even sick. But when I got there, I found things were different. I was taken to the street and told that this is where I'll be working from. I was shocked and asked if this is the work they were offering me.
The United Nations say the trafficking routes are rapidly expanding in East African region. And according to the International Organization of Migration, East African victims of trafficking have traditionally gone to the Gulf. But many like Jay are now being lured to India under false pretenses. Often the women's passports are confiscated. They are then forced to pay the travel and lodging debts to their traffickers through prostitution or even drug trafficking.
I was promised housework, but when I got there, they open a prostitution site for you or train you to be a drug trafficker.
Last year, the International Organization of Migration repatriated 12 Kenyan women who had been trafficked to India. Jay was among the lucky ones.
When they took me to the embassy, I could not believe I'm going to see my family again and not return in a coffin. I'm so thankful to IOM because they also expedited my case. Immediately after I told them my life is in danger, they moved quickly to get me out.
So we have to put our efforts together and ensure that we protect these people. Of course, human rights has to be at the center of every intervention. If we put like human dignity and human rights at the center of every intervention, I'm sure we would be able to protect these very vulnerable.
The International Organization of Migration fears that the economic slump caused by the coronavirus could make many desperate women vulnerable to human trafficking. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
It's 18:30 GMT. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. TikTok's US employees are going to sue the government's order for the business to essentially shut down. And luxury game reserves turn to the game meat trade in order to stay afloat. The details coming up next.
Holding guns, machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Nigeria, militants from the Islamic State West Africa province have attacked Kukawa town in the north end of the country. According to local military officials, these terrorists seized residents who had just returned to their homes after spending nearly 2 years in displacement camps. They had been living in the regional capital of Maiduguri after fleeing from another attack in November 2018. Soldiers who mutinied in Mali have taken over the reins of power in the country. They arrested the president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, and forced him to resign. The soldiers have pledged to set up a civilian transitional government and to hold new elections, even as they were condemned internationally. Elsewhere, members of one of the largest rebel groups in the eastern end of the Democratic Republic of Congo have laid down their weapons. The move comes a month after they ousted their leader, accusing him of committing human rights abuses. Fighting, of course, has been raging between the two groups of the NDCR since last month, when a section loyal to the deputy leader attempted to oust the leader, Chimere Guidon. Before the split, the NDCR controlled vast regions of North Kivu province near the borders of Rwanda and Uganda. And finally, the European Union says it does not recognize the result of the disputed presidential poll in Belarus, and it will impose sanctions on those involved in electoral fraud and repression of protests. The EU held an emergency virtual meeting on Wednesday to discuss the crisis over there. Russia has warned European leaders against what it described as interference in Belarus. That's a run through your headlines. Let's move on to the tech world. A TikTok employee is mounting a legal challenge on behalf of the company's US-based workers in response to President Trump's order effectively banning American transactions with its Chinese parent firm, ByteDance. Now, the march towards a lawsuit comes amid growing uncertainties about the company's future in the United States. The suit has been filed by Patrick Ryan. He's a technical program manager at TikTok. He says his lawsuit will argue that the president does not have the legal authority to, quote, permit or not to permit entire businesses on a whim, end of quote. He says roughly 1,500 employees of TikTok and ByteDance are at risk of not receiving paychecks when Mr. Trump's orders take effect in September. Across the Atlantic, health authorities in Spain are rolling out new measures designed to deal with the fresh rise in COVID-19 cases. As Martin Egan reports from the coastal city of Alicante, additional restrictions on smoking are part of the package.
New measures to help slow the spread of coronavirus. An outdoor smoking ban, nightclubs to shut and a curfew on bars and restaurants, all designed to reduce new outbreaks, especially among the young. Health experts say smoking can increase the spread of coronavirus through exhaled droplets and by hand-to-face contact. Galicia and the Canary Islands have already enforced the measures. Other Spanish regions say they'll follow, but will decide on their own timing.
Do not gather outdoors for drinks or parties. Do not smoke outdoors when you can't keep a distance of at least 2 meters. Keep your distance with friends and do not gather in groups of more than 10 people.
The Valencia region has recently reported 13 new outbreaks, including one here in the port of Denia. All but 2 were related to socialising. All restaurants and bars must be shut by 1 a.m, with no one being allowed to enter after midnight. The move will have a big economic impact, especially on coastal resorts that rely heavily on tourism.
It will have a huge impact here because we have bars that are allowed to shut around 3 in the morning. Now we have to begin with new restrictions. That means we shut at 1 o'clock. So financially, the impact will be brutal.
Banning public smoking is recommended by the World Health Organization as a way to potentially reduce transmission. Spain already had some of Europe's toughest anti-smoking laws, which are now set to become even stricter.
I think everyone should be free, and we have our rights. If they want to smoke, then they have the right to do so.
I am a smoker, but I do support this new measure to stop smoking. If it can help us avoid further COVID infections, then this is a good thing.
The new measures are another heavy blow to an already battered tourism economy. But with the new infections now getting close to what Spaniards suffered at the start of April, it's a move considered by many to be essential. Martin Egan, CGTN, Alicante.
As the United States struggles to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, many food crops have essentially gone to waste amid a drop in demand from restaurants. With unemployment rates rising to record levels, food insecurity has also soared right in tandem. An ancient practice called gleaning is now being seen as a solution for both of those problems. Here's CGTN's Karina Huber taking up the story.
A group of volunteers gather at a farm in rural Vermont. They spend much of the day chit-chatting and picking blueberries. They're engaging in an ancient practice called gleaning, which is traditionally defined as collecting leftover crops by those in need.
Gleaning has been around for more than 2,000 years. It has biblical origins. For much of that history, it was largely practiced by religious groups. But in more recent years, it's been adopted by food justice advocates around the world who are pushing for more equitable access to healthy food.
Gleaning is a really cool way of getting fresh food to people who maybe wouldn't be able to afford it.
After picking the food, gleaners then distribute it to people in need at nearby food banks, pantries, and community centers like this. The whole process is organized by the Vermont Food Bank.
We don't ask about their background or anything. It's just anyone who comes and feels that they need it can take the food. And that feels really satisfying, knowing that I've made a difference and everyone is really happy to get the food.
Amid the coronavirus pandemic, gleaning has taken on increased urgency. It's a practical solution for 2 problems: an abundance of excess crops from farms caused by a drop in demand from restaurants, and increased food insecurity. Widely viewed drone footage of Americans waiting in long lines for a food bank to open in Pittsburgh in March shocked many. Record unemployment has pushed demand for food assistance to new highs.
A lot of people are accessing charitable food for the first time because of COVID. And by having these community distributions, we're really trying to remove any stigma and barriers of having someone going into a food shelf and just meet people where they're at and where their families are going already.
The Vermont Food Bank has gleaning projects in more than 70 farms statewide. Solazzo says there are fewer gleaners than usual because of pandemic safety protocols, but volunteers are more motivated to help.
Now more than ever is a really important time for supporting food sovereignty and food justice as a movement, and hopefully it'll continue beyond when the pandemic settles down a little bit.
Karina Huber, CGTN, Vermont.
In eastern China's Zhejiang province, a robotics contest has inspired Chinese youngsters with some of the latest experimental tech on display. Thousands of students from right across the country are taking part.
Held in the city of Hangzhou, the national final of the 2020 Robocom robotics competition is composed of over a dozen events and tasks. More than 2,000 teenage students have brought their creations to the preliminary competitions ahead of the big showdown.
I've worked so hard to get the top prize. I'm really excited. I found it a lot of fun to make the robot. The coding can help you think more logically and clearly.
With the theme of embracing the future of high technologies, the contest also features an exhibition of the latest technologies in robotics and artificial intelligence.
We're holding this robotics contest especially for youngsters. It's an opportunity to involve them in this emerging industry. And they've been so eager to learn about the latest developments and future trends. The contest has inspired their interest and confidence. It has sown the seeds of innovation in their minds. I'm sure they will seek more opportunities to learn about robotics and related subjects. They will be the main force of our technological innovation.
The contest began on Tuesday and will run for 6 days. Yang Ye, CGTN.
Now, very few parts of most economies around the world have been spared by the COVID-19 pandemic, unless, of course, you're a tech firm. Cue Apple, for example, at the start of the hour. The coffee industry, though, is among those hard hit, and that covers everyone from producers here in East Africa and Latin America to boutique coffee shops and even global coffee chains. Here's CGTN's Ramah Nyang now exploring how some of these companies are adapting to our new norm.
In the fiscal third quarter, Starbucks lost as much as $3.2 billion in revenue because of COVID-19. In July, San Francisco's Phil's Coffee cited the pandemic for having to lay off 180 employees.
The larger companies, I think they have more economic power and they can survive a temporary blip. But we are worried about these smaller shops and smaller chains.
We closed the cafes entirely. We took almost everybody who was working full-time down to part-time if we could keep them. Otherwise, we just had to furlough most of our team, right? Myself included. I could go down to part-time work. I want to keep working. I want to help grow this company, so there's something we can all come back to.
Because so many offices and restaurants have shut down, San Francisco headquartered Equator Coffees says it's down to about 60% of their wholesale selling.
Colombia here. This one is Sumatra, Brazil.
But Equator continues to roast. And they continue to adapt to the market. While online sales used to make up just a small percentage, the company says it's now up to 15% of business. A big boost has come from online subscriptions at a discounted price. That means it's far more labor intensive. Instead of the typical 2.2 kilogram bags that go to offices and restaurants, workers are filling and mailing bags half that size or less to individual households. And nothing quite epitomizes the coffee business today than a single UPS shipment right here at Equator. Here they're selling it through their own website or through Amazon. Here they're selling it through MistoBox, which is a third-party online coffee selling service. And here it's being sold through Trade, an online subscription service working with the top 50 roasteries in the country.
The goal is to meet people where they are, which they're working at home. So we are trying to reach them online, through social media, through our website, kind of any way we can reach these people that are still drinking coffee. They're just drinking coffee differently now.
Are people going to really change to a different way of working and stay at home a lot more than before? If it happens, I'm sure that there will be an impact on coffee. But right now, it's very hard to know what the direction will be.
Equator Coffees has managed to reopen 6 of its 8 stores for contactless mobile orders. They've also been able to bring back just about every retail employee who wants to work. While these customers are certainly relieved they're still open, Equator is just happy people still have a taste for high-quality coffee at the store or at home. Mark New, San Rafael, California.
Now, back in March, South Africa responded to the COVID-19 pandemic with one of the strictest restrictions imposed anywhere in the world. 5 months later, some of those restrictions have been relaxed, but the country's borders are still closed, potentially all the way into 2021. With foreign tourist activity completely off the table for the foreseeable future, CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar explores what luxury game reserves in Africa's most industrialized economy are doing to stay afloat.
With most international travel stalled and the economy nosediving, South Africa's luxury game lodges are empty. As safari vehicles gather dust, this community-owned Big Five game reserve has now turned to selling game meat to stay afloat. The meat is sold online through a partnership with KZN Game Meat at farmers markets and some Pick and Pay stores.
We had to look for other ways of boosting the income in the reserve so it can generate money to pay the bills for running it. We have electricity bills, water pumping, general maintenance and paying of salaries. That's why we decided to use the culled animals that are breeding in numbers. That meat can be sold in the market so we can generate extra income to cover the expenses of running the reserve.
Somkhanda gives away or sells at low cost the meat from grazers such as Simpala and Nyala. The reserve would normally cull them each year to manage stocks, depending on the weather conditions and available grassland. Now faced with a loss of up to 90% of its revenue, Somkhanda is more actively marketing the meat, often seen as a delicacy bought by restaurants and foreign tourists.
With the tourism and all of that income we've lost, we had to look for something else. There's always culling on the reserve, and basically all we've done is we've said, instead of culling and then just giving that meat away or selling it at a very poor and low price locally, what we've done is to try and market it and put it into the commercial market.
Rising costs of safety procedures such as hand sanitizer stations, temperature checks and protective equipment for staff have also added to the reserve's financial burden.
Without on normal model, we have lost about 80 to 90% of our revenue, so that's what we have lost. So it's a serious challenge that we are facing. But fortunately, through donor funding and through the meat sales market, we were able to keep the ship afloat and continue with our conservation work.
South Africa has the second largest tourism industry in Africa. The government relies on the sector to indirectly contribute up to 9.1% of its total employment and 7% of its GDP. But the strict Level 5 lockdown in Africa's most advanced economy, introduced in late March, has not prevented it from having by far the most confirmed COVID-19 cases on the continent. As a result, the challenges the country is facing could mean that tourism will have to wait until 2021 before borders are fully reopened. At the moment, provincial borders are only open for business travel in South Africa. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
Quick run through commodity prices for you. Let's focus on gold for the time being. Mali was the 5th biggest gold producer on the continent last year. About 61 tons of bullion came out of that country. Now, despite the removal of Ibrahim Boubacar Keita as the country's president in the last 24 hours, mining companies over there, from Canada's B2 Gold, Australia's Resolute Mining, London-listed Hummingbird Resources, they say so far the operations haven't been affected. Spot gold about 0.6% lower at 12.36 GMT. At that point in time, it was around $1,990 per ounce. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how businesses in Ghana are opting for e-commerce to ride out the damage from the pandemic. Welcome back. Let's head over to Ghana, where many SMEs are struggling to bounce back after COVID-19 restrictions there were lifted. Some companies in the hospitality industry, like restaurants, are trying to adjust by taking an increasing percentage of their business online as clients are avoiding eating out. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai looks at how this change is playing out from the capital, Accra.
Sewa Jemfiduku's restaurant is one of the small businesses in Accra that has been hit hard due to the disruptions caused by COVID-19. When the country went into lockdown in March, she had to make changes for her business to stay afloat.
Because of the restrictions, people are not coming in, and so it means that a lot of our foodstuffs would have to go bad, would have to lay off our workers, or, at a point to make sure that they work shorter periods. And so we at Chop Shop run a shift system.
Sewa says she had to take her business online by using social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram to attract customers. And because people were not coming in to eat due to lockdown restrictions, she had to rely on delivery services, creating jobs for people like Abdul Hamid.
In our economy, there's no work, so this is the delivery we are doing to survive for the day, and it's really helping us.
Ghana has lifted lockdown restrictions, meaning businesses can now fully operate, but some are still struggling to bounce back. The government has tasked managers of restaurants with enforcing all safety measures against COVID-19, such as wearing face masks and maintaining safe distancing. But restaurant owners say people are not coming to dine in due to fears of the spread of the coronavirus. More than 92% of Ghana's workforce is employed within micro, small and medium-scale enterprises. The government has launched a $170 million business support program to be distributed as loans to SMEs with up to 2 years repayment plan at 3% interest. It hopes this will help reduce the impact of COVID-19 for businesses, but some say they would have preferred a cut in taxes instead.
Like every other business, I was also expecting that the government would give us a relief on tax payments so that we'll be able to survive, because really within this period we're really just surviving, so tax relief from the government within this time would have really been helpful.
Sewa Jemfiduku is uncertain when her restaurant will fully bounce back as the coronavirus pandemic continues, but she hopes a rising number of people ordering online will help her business stay afloat. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Let's wrap up the hour with a bit of art, shall we? Tinga Tinga paintings, they are prepared through a rather unique style developed in the second half of the 20th century in Tanzania. And now, Tinga Tinga is one of the most widely represented forms of tourist-oriented paintings in Tanzania, Kenya, and other countries in East Africa. Today we head to Tinga Tinga village in Dar es Salaam to meet one Abdul Mkura, one of the best painters in this particular genre.
Jina langu Abdu Amonde Mkura. Nimekuja hapa mwaka 1974 na nilipokuja hapa nilifikia kwa kaka yangu Omari Amonde. Kaka yangu nilimkuta anachora picha za tinga tinga, lakini sikufahamu tinga tinga ni nini, lakini alinielimisha tu vizuri tu. Tinga tinga maana yake kwamba ni mtu mmoja aliyeanzisha, anaitwa Edward Saidi Tinga Tinga. Yeye ameanza kazi ya kuchora 1968. Ilipofika 72 akafariki. Sisi hapa ni ushirika Tinga Tinga Society Cooperative. Tumeanzisha na 90 mpaka leo tunakubalika na serikali. Na katika memba wa Tinga Tinga tuko 52. Tinga ilikuja kwamba ni kitu cha kufikiri kichwani. Zamani ilikuwa tunakata sindibodi. Kwa hiyo tunakata zile kwa kutegemea size ambayo inatakikana kubebeka. Baadaye tena mfumo wa kuchukua wateja wetu wanaziona mzito, ndio tukabadilisha mfumo wa plough ili kwa vile mzito kwa kubeba, ndio tukachukua sasa kuwa tunawamba kwenye frame nguo ambaye material yetu sasa tumebadilisha, ndio haya mnayoyaona madukani sasa hivi. Usanii wa zamani unatofautiana na sasa hivi. Zamani tingatinga hamna kusketch. Tingatinga inakuja kwamba unachukua, unatayarisha rangi, wewe na brushi na mimi unaanza kuchora. Lakini unaanza kuchora sio kwa kutazama kwamba kukopi mahali. Kwa mfano kama mimi nimeishi kijijini. Wanyama wale tulikuwa wengine tunakutana nao, huyu swala, huyu pundamilia, huyu faru, utachora kama vile ulivyomwona. Hatuwezi kufananisha na kitu, ila tunachukua mawazo ya kichwani. Kwa hiyo mfumo huu umebadilika mara 2 au mara 3, kwa sababu mpaka sasa hivi kwenye tray tunaweza kuchora, kwenye sinia ambaye yeye aluminium tunaweza kuchora, kwenye t-shirt tunaweza kuchora. Kwa hiyo ili mabadiliko haya yamekwenda msisimuko wa kazi ambaye tunazozibuni sisi wenyewe. Mimi ninapenda kuchora michoro mingi sana. Lakini michoro niliyokupendelea sana na hasa kuwa na moyo wangu kupenda sana, mchoro wa tembo. Tembo nimechora miaka 20 zilizopita. Nilikuwa na mawazo ya kufikiria hali ya tembo alivyo. Kwanza tembo ni mkubwa kuliko wanyama wote. Alafu tembo ana nguvu kuliko wanyama wote. Niliwaza kwamba nikiweka tembo niweke mpako mweusi. Lakini kwa nini ninaweka mpako mweusi? Huu mpako mweusi sawa na giza, wakati hamna mbalamwezi, hamna nyota kali, giza nene. Sasa na hii nyeusi na tembo, yeye ni anatembea usiku. Kwa hiyo sasa nilifananisha kwamba wale wakubwa hawaoni usiku, hawaoni mchana. Sasa sawa na inti anaikanyaga tu, bwana wewe twende. Hizi kazi sisi tunabadilisha kila awamu. Sasa vijana wa sasa hivi kwanza wameenda shule, wanataka kwenda na maisha ya sasa hivi digital. Sasa lazima wachanganye zamani mpaka sasa hivi, na ndio maana tunaona picha zimebadilika. Tinga Tinga imesifika kwa maadili ya uchoraji wenyewe. Umekuwa kama katuni na elimisha kama shule. Wengi wametengeneza vitabu, wengi wamefundishia watoto. Kwa hiyo ni moja la somo Tinga Tinga, inaelimisha. Mpango wangu wa kwenda mbele kwamba picha mimi huwa natumia baada ya miaka 3, ninafikiri kuchora kitu kingine kipya. Na muundo niliyechora hivi sasa hivi, ninatarajia kuchora picha nyingine mpya. Jina la hiyo picha inaitwa Zamani Mpaka Siku Hizi. Na matarajio yangu hiyo picha itakuwa zaidi ya picha zingine zozote zile nilizoanza kuzichora kwa wakati.
Art from East Africa ends this edition of Global Business Africa. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.